we go. Thank you very much. There were a couple of tunes. The first one was, we fondly call it Rabbit, but it was written by a friend.
No, that's not cool.
Oh, that's sorry. That's the Halloween reel, which is apt for this occasion. And the second one was Jack the Devil, which is on a thing that we produced to download, so you can get that if you want. Ask us later.
You have to be quite careful playing here because I'm really conscious of that.
Only hit it once.
Only hit
But
it
I
once,
mean, if Marina knocks down the tunnel and collapses the tunnel with her violin bow.
You got all your text.
Yeah. Right,
Thank
we're
you
going
for
to
coming
hand
and
over.
studying
Yeah,
text.
we're going to hand over
Soothing.
to Sandy Chadwin, who's going to frighten you. Hopefully, that's the objective of the evening. There you go.
Evening. If you step out of here and make your way down to the banks of the river and turn towards the Tyne, you can walk up, and just where the Ousburn meets the Tyne, there's a currents meet and eddies, and that is where the bodies go. That's where they're found. Those who fell, those who jumped, and those who were pushed. Now there used to be a house there, opposite the pub, called the House of the Dead, because that was where these bodies were stored until they were claimed by family, church, or town corporation. So how did they pass the time, these dead, as they waited? Perhaps they sang songs, made music, and perhaps they told stories. Stories like these. There was a ship, let us call her the Demeter, and she was sailing out of Liverpool on the Atlantic run. Her captain, good sailor, hard man. On board, a new sailor. We'll call him Billy. And he was desperate, had been all his life to go to sea. It was all he wanted, all he had dreamt of, was to go to sea in the big boats. And at last he had got his dream and had joined the Demeter. Unfortunately, he was clumsy, he was maladroit, he meant well, he was eager, desperately eager. But he'd rush in and he'd make mistakes, and mistakes at sea are dangerous. And some people got hurt and somebody almost fell overboard. And the captain got more and more angry. Until finally, after one particularly disastrous accident, the captain grabbed Billy, picked him up, shook him, and hurled him down onto the deck with his head against the capstan. And that was him, dead. Well, these things happen at sea. Not much you can do. They read the funeral over him, wrapped him in sailcloth, weighted him, and over the side he went. The ship was not happy after that, not surprisingly. But I've noticed that the captain in particular seemed strangely nervy. And he would start suddenly. And he would ask the mate strange questions like, how many men did you send up to deal with the main sheet? And the mate would say, 3. But the captain was sure he could see 4. And he thought he knew who the 4th might be. And so it continued. Every job, there seemed to be an extra man on the job, and always, although he couldn't quite make out the shape. the features. The captain knew who it was. And it got worse, and the captain took to staying in his cabin. But even then, he was finally driven out and spoke to the mate as they stood on the upper deck, saying, "I see him. I see Billy. He is still with the crew. He is still with us. He is still with me. I wake in the morning and he is by my bunk. And he is there. He's standing next to you." Well, the mate looked around, obviously. When he looked back, captain racing to the stern, and over he went. The Board of Inquiry later established accidental death, that was for the sake of the widow, while the mind was disordered. And the mate never did tell anybody that when he rushed to the stern and looked, he thought he could see not just one head bobbing in the sea, but two. And he thought he heard the captain's last cry. "He is with me still." Thank you. As we're underground, this next story is about how being underground is probably not a wildly good idea. It's the story of King Hurler. This was a long time ago, a long time ago, before England was even a country, but was instead a mass of small kingdoms, and mostly forested over. And amongst these small kingdoms was one ruled by King Hurler. And one day, King Hurler and his men, his knights, went out hunting the boar. And Hurler got separated from his men, and it was a hot, warm day. So he found himself some shade and rested and wished that there was a cool stream somewhere nearby so that he may drink. Then there came a rustling from the woodland around him, and on a small pony came a small, bearded, but beautifully apparelled man, about 3 foot tall. And in his hand, he had a gold goblet on which the drops of condensation were forming. And Hurler could smell the iced wine. "Drink of this, if you are thirsty," said the Dwarf King, for that is who he was. Now Hurler knew that it was dangerous to accept gifts from the other people, the Fae, the lords and ladies. But it was a hot day, and he was king, and this is a king. And king to king courtesy shall pass. And so with a grateful nod, he took the wine and downed it in one. "Well, now we are friends," said the Dwarf King. "And when you marry, I shall attend your feast with great gifts." Sure enough, a year later, Hurler took himself a queen. And on the wedding day, at the court there arrived the Dwarf King with his retinue of knights, and much gold and jewelry that they had hewed from the ground did they bring with them and beautifully cast instruments and cups and plates and swords as gifts to the new couple. 3 days the feast lasted. And when the dwarf king stood to lead his retinue away, he said, I must return this courtesy, so that when I marry, you and your retinue must come and feast with us. And a year later, the word came to King Hurler. The dwarf king was to be wed. Careful instructions were sent as to how to find his great halls. And Hurler and his knights travelled through strange paths that none of them had ever seen before, through the forest, till they came to a cliff face. Bewildered, they looked around and then it cracked open. And a beautifully dressed dwarf stepped out and said, "This way, gentlemen," and led them in through the new tunnel into a great hall, beautifully lit, beautifully decorated. And there was the dwarf king in all his finery, and there was the dwarf queen in all hers. And there King Hurler and his men, they feasted for 3 days, and a fine 3 days they were. And time came when they had to leave. "You must leave with one final gift," said the dwarf king. "I insist. You will leave riding horses of mine." It was a strange gift, but when Hurler and his men saw the horses, glorious things that they were not minded to turn it down. And if there was a strange look, even a sinister look in the king's eye, as he watched them mount, King Hurler thought nothing of it. So back out of the hall they went. When they left the tunnel that immediately closed behind them, there was no forest. It was all clear fields with sheep and cattle. And there was an old shepherd watching over the sheep. And he looked and gasped when he saw this troop of 300 appear apparently from nowhere. Hurler demanded to know where they were, what had happened. But the man couldn't understand a word. So finally he sent his boy away and came back to a very old man. And Hurler spoke to him, and this old man said, "You're speaking the old language. The language of my people, we who were here before the Saxons." And Hurler said, "I'm King Hurler. And these are my men." And the man said, "I've heard of King Hurler and his queen. Long ago, they disappeared and she died of a broken heart." Now at this, one of the knights angrily shouted it was some form of trick and jumped from his horse. But the moment he hit the ground, he dissolved away into dust. For this was the thing of it. Every day they had spent underground. 100 years had passed in their world. And for as long as they stayed on the dwarf gift horses, they were safe. But if once any of them touched the earth, they would immediately, time would immediately catch up with them, and dust there would be. They say that to this day, King Hurlo and his men still ride. And now and again, one will despair and will jump from the horse and disappear into dust. And it may be that you might meet. And if you do not be scared. Feel pity, particularly for King Hurler, for it is his improvidence in accepting the wine that condemned them to this living death. And although he yearns for oblivion, he owes it to his men that he will not dismount until the last of them do. And many of them are still too hungry for even this life. So should you meet, give him my best, but try not to look in his eyes, for they are terrible. Thank you. I'm going to finish this little batch with a thoroughly unpleasant story. It's an old one. Shakespeare quotes it. And it's called Mr. Fox. And it goes something like this. Lady Mary was fair. Mary was fine. She had 7 brothers and more lovers than she knew what to do with. But of them all, she cared only for Mr. Fox. Handsome he was, but not vain. Brave, but no braggart. Gentle, but no craven. And he was as handsome as the witch's waistcoat. And Lady Mary loved him. And they were to be wed. There's only one thing. He had never invited her to his fine house just outside the town. That can wait. For our wedding day, he would laughingly say when she mentioned it. And now that day was almost upon them. On the night before the wedding, Lady Mary slept. And she dreamt. And she dreamt that she was standing outside Mr. Fox's house, the gates, the house. And over the gates were written, "Be bold." She went through the gates, across the courtyard, to the main door, over which was written, "Be bold, be bold." Through this door, down a corridor, another door, be bold, but not too bold. Through this door, and to a final door, over which was carved, be bold, but not too bold, lest let your heart's blood run cold. Through that door, and oh, what a sight was there. Brides, still in their wedding outfits, or dead, or slaughtered. And behind her, Lady Mary could hear a noise. So she frantically hid herself behind a truck, and peeked and saw Mr. Fox dragging in another bride, snatching off her jewelry, desperately trying to pull off her ring. It wouldn't come, so he took his knife and and the hand flew through the air to land in Lady Mary's lap. The next day, after the wedding breakfast, Lady Mary spoke to Mr. Fox and said, "Last night, I dreamt I visited your house. Is that so?" said Mr. Fox. "And I dreamt that over the gate it said, 'Be bold.' 'Tis not so," said Mr. Fox. And then over to the main door, it said, "Be bold, be bold." "'Tis not so," said Mr. Fox. Then down the corridor, a door over which it said, be bold, but not too bold." "'Tis not so, and 'twas not so," said Mr. Fox. Then a final door, over which it said, be bold, but not too bold, lest that your heart's blood run cold." "'Tis not so, and 'twas not so," said Mr. Fox. And in that room, I saw the bodies and the poor corpses of all the brides you have killed, and I saw you murder a new bride. "'Tis not so, and 'twas not so, and God forbid that it should ever be so. But 'tis so, and 'twas so, and God forgive you that it ever was so," cried Lady Mary, and with that her brothers unsheathed their swords, stood, and that was the end of Mr. Fox. Thank you very much.
Well, Mr. Fox, there was no proper evidence, was there? This one
We started to tell you this story before, but this is the tune.
it goes with the story.
Yes, well, you can tell the story.
Yes, we had a friend visit us from New England, and he came across and visited, and he's a Northumbrian piper. And when we said goodbye to him, we said goodbye to him outside the back of the cathedral in Newcastle. And if you've ever been up there, you'll know that above one of the ornate doorways opposite the rear entrance of the cathedral, there is a rabbit carved above the door. And it's a vampire rabbit. It's got great big long teeth, and there is blood painted on the teeth, and it's a black rabbit, and it looks really evil. Anyway, our friend David decided he would write a tune for the vampire rabbit. So,
And he
yes.
played it to us on Tuesday, and we opened our big mouths and said, "Oh, we'll do it at the Halloween concert." So there's just a little caveat there.
Yes.
Okay.
This is a song written by one of the best surreal writers of songs in a traditional style, a lady called Lal Waterson, who died some years ago. And she conjures up images. I always think of her as a sort of English Tom Waits, because Tom Waits' songs conjure up little vignettes in your head, and you go, and they're all different, each verse is different. And this is very much the same, except for the last two verses, which tell a sort of story. Sleeping in my bed, strange thoughts running through my head. I dreamed you were playing with my hair. Fine flying sparrow, fine, fine horseman. Rain falls and the wind roars, all the folks are indoors. We came through a ford, riding over the moors. Fine flying sparrow, fine, fine horseman. Your dreams among my dreams are blue seas among sunbeams, shades of yellow, shades of green. These are your dreams among my dreams. Fine flying sparrow, fine, fine horseman. Morning to you, farming man. Here's to your heart, your family in the land. I lay down a ring and a golden band on a field for a ride around, for a fine flying sparrow, fine, fine horseman. Morning likewise, maiden and man. My family is dead, my heart is in the ground. I have no land, this is no time for a farming man, or a fine flying sparrow, fine, fine horseman. In my bed, strange thoughts running through my head. I dreamed you were playing with my head. Fine flying sparrow, fine, fine horseman. we're going to finish this little section with a tune that we made up. Not far from here, and any of you who are familiar with this area, the Eusburn area, will be aware that not far from here, just across the way, there's a place called Ballast Hills. For years I thought Ballast Hills was hills made of ballast that tipped off ships. No, Ballast Hills is a very old burial ground from the 1690s, I think it was first used as a plague pit. And later on, right through until the early 19th century, it was the non-conformist burial ground for Newcastle. So there's a lot of dead people under the ground, not far from here, just along there. So if the hands start appearing through the walls and scare you, it's just the people from Ballast Hills. It's a very sad place. It's a kind of poignant place. You don't really notice it as you go past. But we thought we should write a tune for it. It's kind of nice. If I could see the guitar in the slide. Oh, everything's the wrong way. I really can't see the French guitar.
Okay.
Thank you, hand you back to Simon. You sounding well, sounding there, coughing away like you didn't.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Nothing trivial then.
You know, it's a non-conformist churchyard. I'll be Quakers. Offer you chocolate. Okay. This is a story set long, long, long time ago and far, far to the north. There were two sisters. One was fair, though her heart was dark. Other dark, though her heart was fair. And while the dark-haired sister loved the fair-haired sister, the fair-haired sister hated the dark-haired sister with all the jealousy and bitterness that only a truly evil heart can summon. Now they were the daughters of the local laird, who had a fine hall by the sea, and they would walk along the cliffs by the hall. And one morning, the fair-haired sister's hatred and bitterness grew so great that she suddenly just pushed her dark-haired sister into the turbulent sea. And even then, as she desperately struggled to try and get back and cried for help, the dark-haired sister did not realize that this was deliberate. She assumed it was an accident. And it wasn't until she watched and saw her sister smile and turn away, just before she went down for the third time. Now the fair-haired sister returned to the great hall, made great woe and misery about how her sister had slipped and had fallen into the sea, and a great search was mounted, but nothing was ever found, and the whole family went into mourning, and no one suspected the fair-haired, dark-hearted sister of anything. Now, along the coast, there was a fisherman and his wife. They had a small craft. Good people. He would take out his boat, catch what he can during the day. She would till the land, grow what they could, and look after their small stock of livestock. And one day, a minstrel came to visit, came passing, and he asked for hospitality. And in many ways, long ago though it was, these were civilized times. And minstrels and storytellers, for what it's worth, were given the respect they earned. So they took in the minstrel and gave him food and rested him in the main bed while they slept on the floor. But the next morning, when the fisherman went out for his daily fish, there was the corpse of the fair-haired sister washed up on the shore, on the beach. And despite all, still, she was beautiful. And the minstrel came to look, and he looked at her hair, this long, fair, almost golden hair. And he begged of the fisherman and his wife if you could have 3 strands of her hair to replace 3 strands of his harp that were missing. They saw no harm, and so it was done. The minstrel moved on, and a day or so later arrived at the hall, which had only just come out of mourning. So he was welcomed, given food, and asked to perform for them that night. So it was a bright, great fire going, warm, cheerful, almost, event. The king and the queen, the laird and the lady, and their daughter at the high table. And the minstrel went to get his harp, but before he could put finger to string, one of the hairs that he had taken began to vibrate, and the voice of the dead sister could be heard, echoing round the hall, saying, "Hail to you, my father, who made me and loved me." Then the second string, the second hair, it began to vibrate. And again the voice, all round the hall, "Hail to you, my mother, who bore me and loved me." And finally, the third hair began to vibrate. And the voice echoed round as it said, "But woe to you, my sister, who hated me and killed me." And with that, the third hairstring snapped. And as it snapped, so did the treacherous sister's heart, and down she fell, dead. And that is the tale of the two sisters. Now this one is a story that happened, not that long ago, say about 100 or so years. There was a house party in a Georgian house out in the country. But more guests than anticipated had arrived. And so when one of the final guests arrived, there was some consternation amongst the hosts. And finally they took him aside and said, "It's a terrible thing to ask, but would you mind if we put you in the blue room?" "And why would I mind that?" the guest asked. "Well, because it's well known to be haunted. No one who's stayed in that room has had a quiet night." Now the guests were scornful. He did not believe in such things. Ghosts are nonsense. This is a time of science. "I will sleep in the blue room," he said, "and I will sleep well." Now it occurred to him that this was a large party, and there were some of the younger, more boisterous set were there. And while he strongly maintained that he had a fine and good sense of humour, like all people who say they have a good sense of humour, he didn't. And he was fearful that some kind of trick would be played on him during the night. And he had no wish to spend the rest of the weekend being mocked and joked on, and his dignity constantly punctured because of accounts of the ghosts that they had managed to get in to the bedroom. So to that end, when he went to bed, he carefully locked the door. And even though it was a warm night, he equally carefully locked all the windows, drew the curtains, checked the whole room. There was no way to get in at all. And only then did he finally retire to the four-poster bed pulled the curtains around him, and blew out his candle. And then a voice in his ear said, "Now we're shut in for the night." Thank you very much.
Yes. Yes, it's cosy. Still can't see. I'm good. Tell me if this destroys anyone's viewing pleasure. I'll change the light a little bit so it's not. Still not much better.
Indian tune called The Wild Hills of Bonnie?
It's been claimed in different towns by Scots people, but it is definitely the Wild Hills of Bonnie, Northumberland. This is quite a well-known folk song, but it's a proper ghost story folk song. Young love said to me, my mother won't mind, and my father won't slight you for your lack of kind. And she laid her hand on me, and this she did say, it will not be long, love, till our wedding day. She stepped away from me, and she moved through the fair, and fondly I watched her move here and move there. Then she turned homeward, one star away, like a swan in the evening moves over the lake. And the people were saying, no two ever were wed, but one had a sorrow that never was said. And she smiled as she passed with a good Santa gift. That was the last time that I saw my dear. Last night she came to me, my dead love came in. So softly she moved that her feet made no din, and she laid her hand on me, and this she did say, it will not be long, love, till our wedding day.
So there was once a fair maiden, and there was a handsome man, and they seemed to fall in love. They would meet most days, stroll around the village, by the river, through the woods, talk and joke. And then he would make his farewells and leave her. She tried to follow him one time, partly as a joke, partly curiosity, to see where it was he went every night, for he didn't live in the village, and no one in the village seemed to know who he was. But she found that she was unable to follow him. Mist would come down, or he'd turn a corner, and when she turned it, no sign of him. And it began to prey on her. And if she asked him where he lived, he would smile and change the subject and try and distract her. So finally, she went to the wise woman of the village and asked for help. Now the wise woman knew who the young man was, and she advised the maiden best to leave it. Best choose one of the village boys. There's enough of them. They're good men. They will work hard to keep you fed and warm. But by now, the maiden only wished one thing: to know more about this man she had fallen in love with. Well, if you must and if you will, said the wise woman. Next time you meet, behave as you always behave. But when he leaves, follow him once again. But when you're following him, have in your left hand a flower from the Fiddle, and in your right hand a branch from a yew tree. And this is what she did. They met, they had a pleasant day, strolling in the woods by the river, around the village. And he made his farewells. And she followed. And this time she was able to follow him. No mists, no strange disappearances around corners. Through a strange valley they went, till they came to a plain in which stood one solitary house. Now the maiden recognized the house immediately. So would any of us if we'd seen it. And we will see it. For this was the house of death. And each of us meets death twice. Once on our last taking a breath, but the first time just before our first taking of a breath. When death talks to us and tells us exactly what is going to happen to us. But then he touches us on our forehead. And we forget. That's why we all have that little dent there, as where death touches us. On seeing the house, the maiden was unable not to give out a sad little cry. And Death turned, saw her, saw what she was carrying. And he too was sad, for he had genuinely loved her and meant her no harm, but now she would be terrified of him. But she didn't scream, and she didn't run away. So finally Death approached her and said, "Are you not scared of me? You know who I am." And the maiden said, "No, I'm not. You may be Death, but you've always been kind and considerate and loving with me. I cannot think that there is evil in you." And Death was content. "We will not meet again," he said, "save for the one last time. But until then, I can see you no more." And so it was. The maid returned to the village, married one of the farming boys there, who kept her fed and kept her warm and loved her. And she did meet Death, as we all will. But he took his time before he came to see her. Thank you. This is a final story. It's American, but I'm not going to try the accent. It's called The Bear, and it goes like this. Deep in the woods, there was a cabin, and in the cabin there lived Grandpa, Grandma, Pa, Ma, Jolene, Little Jimmy, and the bear. And one day Pa went out hunting. And when he got back, there was Grandma, Ma, Jolene, Little Billy, Jimmy even, and the bear. "Where's Grandpa?" asked Pa. "Why?" "The bear ate him," they said. Now this got Pa right, and he said, "I'm going to kill that bear." But they all took on so that he just didn't have the heart to do it. And the next day, Pa went out hunting. And when he got back, there was Ma, Jolene, Little Jimmy, and the bear. "Where's Grandma?" asked Pa. "Why?" "The bear ate her," they said. And Pa said, "I'm going to kill that bear." But they all took on so that he just didn't have the heart to do it. And the next day, Pa went out hunting. When he got back, there was Jolene and Little Billy. "Where's Ma?" asked Pa. "Why?" "The bear ate her." And Pa was so riled, he said, "I am going to kill that bear." But they took on so that he just didn't have the heart to do it. And the next day, Pa went out hunting. And when he got back, there was little Jimmy and the bear. "Where's Jillian?" asked Pa. "Why, the bear ate her," said little Jimmy. And this got Pa riled, and he said, "I'm going to kill that bear." But little Jimmy took on so that he just didn't have the heart to do it. And the next day, Pa went out hunting. And when he got back, there was the bear. "Where is little Jimmy?" asked Pa. "Why, I ate him," said the bear. And this got Pa so riled up that he said, "I am going to kill you, bear." But the bear, he took on so that Pa just didn't have the heart to do it. And the next day, the bear went out hunting. Thank you very much.
Right, it's culture time. This is it's totally great things. Yeah. This is a song that was originally a Rudyard Kipling. No, it wasn't Rudyard. Alfred Lord Tennyson poem. And it was set to music by a wonderful American musician called Ron Yarbo. A lot of people have done this song. I got in touch with her and asked her whether I could do this. Sunset and evening star, and one clear call for me. May there be no mourning of the bar when I put out to sea. When I put out to sea. When I put out to sea. And may there be no mourning of the bar when I put out to sea. For such a tide as moving seems to sleep, too full for sound or foam, when that which drew from out the boundless deep turns again home, turns again home, turns again home, when that which drew from out the boundless deep turns again home. Twilight and evening bell, and after that the dark, and may there be no sadness of farewell when I embark, when I embark, when I embark, and may there be no sadness of farewell when I embark. For though for out are born a time and place, the blood may bear me far. I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. When I have crossed the bar. When I have crossed the bar. I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. When I have crossed the bar. When I have crossed the bar. I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. Crossing the bar. We're going to leave you with this one. We hope you've had a nice evening and aren't too cold and damp. I'm playing a carbon fibre guitar. She's got a wooden fiddle. It'll probably fall to bits by the end of the evening. Right, yes, this is a tune what we made up. It's the Watch House Winter Warmer, so to prepare you for the winter months. Thank you all very, very much